Hello and welcome to Say Hi to the Future, Ingenious Thinkers, a podcast aimed at highlighting the human side of ingenuity. My name is Ken Tenser, curator of Say Hi to the Future, helping leaders think differently in the face of uncertainty and ambiguity. Better thinking, better outcomes. With me today are Seth Levine and Elizabeth MacBride, co-authors of Capital Evolution, The New American Economy, a book that reshapes how we understand innovation and growth in the U.S. It draws on Levine's experience as a venture capitalist and MacBride's background as a global business journalist. Seth and Elizabeth, welcome to Say Hi to the Future.
Thank you so much for having us.
Great to be here, Ken. Thank you.
So Elizabeth and Seth, first Seth, okay, it says venture capital background. I just noticed that you're an intern at a flat pack furniture assembly. Is this like a little surprise for your VC partners and Elizabeth, or what is that?
Yeah, so it's funny. My wife is a real estate developer. She develops projects in downtown Longmont where we live. These are 100-plus-year-old buildings. She has an amazing job. So she owns, and she's really into place-based sort of work. So she's very deliberate about what types of businesses she has in, really trying to revitalize the downtown in our hometown, which had been, and maybe not as, it's coming back very nicely, but it had been sort of neglected. And in one of those spaces, she decided to open a bookstore because there was not, Longmont's actually a town we're near Boulder and we're bigger than Boulder, but we didn't have a new bookstore. So she decided to open one because she has a million ideas and lots of projects. And so I was helping her, assemble like IKEA style furniture and, open books. And then there were a lot of boxes involved. So there's a lot of, flat pack and recycling those boxes. And she jokingly referred to me one day as the intern. And then we decided it would be funny if I put that up on LinkedIn. So I did. And I am an intern at Composition Shop, which is my wife's bookstore.
There you go. It's now.
I also do some light IT for them too.
Okay. So Elizabeth, look, I know your background is writing as journalist. How do you and Seth work this process through? Because you're very different in your backgrounds.
Yeah, it's a great question, actually. So we came together kind of randomly at first. I mean, literally, I was like coming through Boulder and I thought, I remember this really interesting venture capitalist. I'm going to see if he's around for a chat.
Sadly, he wasn't available, but there I was. So.
Luck at it. Here you are.
And I remember sitting in Seth's office and we were like, we both have always wanted to write a book. Why don't we try like doing some kind of coffee table thing on innovation and entrepreneurship in the middle of the US? And then we went down that path. And midway through developing it, the book, the pandemic hit, and we realized we were sitting on top of important understanding and research into the small business economy in the U.S. We wrote The New Builders, which was our first book, figured out that we really actually like writing together, which we do in a very organic way. Like we just kind of open a Google Doc and one of us takes the first draft. Then we come back in and edit and revise and talk, and sometimes we argue. But in that process, we produced The New Builders, which had a big impact on policy in the U.S. and had a good track record of sales. And so out of that, we decided to get bigger and wrote a book about the future of capitalism.
Very cool. Well, Seth, you seem to be really shy on energy. So how do you get through this?
I have a lot of energy. Yes, I have that. And I also have a very, very clouded mind. It's like there's a busy mind. There's a lot of things going on in there. And one of the things I've really loved about writing and of course about our partnership together has been, my mind actually kind of quiets down when I write. I really like that. I really kind of appreciate that. And, Elizabeth described this sort of organic process and both of our books have been, there have been some great books written by venture capitalists. So I'm not dissing them necessarily, but a lot of them are the kind of books where you just sort of sit down at a computer and you're like, I'm going to tell some stories about my time as a VC, right? Or things I've observed. And Elizabeth and I are writing very different style books where we are deeply researching a topic. We are, I mean, for both the New Builders and for this new book, we talked to maybe 100 people, CEOs, workers sort of up and down the corporate chain, academics, policymakers, et cetera. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of reviewing studies and sort of having data and understanding it. And so it's a different style of process, which, by the way, is not front to back either, right? You sort of popcorn chapters. And I just, that process is really, really interesting, and I find incredibly engaging. And I think one of the things I appreciate about our partnership is that I'll speak for myself. I'm a better writer now because Elizabeth has taught me how to be a better writer, right? She's a great narrative writer. I was not. And we do write more narrative style in both books. And I really pick that up and appreciate that. So we really, I think, play off of each other's strengths. I like to write very sort of factual stuff. And I think, maybe Elizabeth picked up a little bit on that from me, and the sort of they blend together, really nicely. And it's not that like I wrote chapter 1, Elizabeth wrote chapter 2. I mean, it's much more like we write over top of each other constantly. And I think the result in the first book was great. And the second book is even better, right? Because we're really trying to write something that is thought-provoking, but very accessible, right? And we're not taking sort of extreme positions, right? We're both sort of very centrist in our views. I call it pragmatic in our views, probably a better way of saying it. And we're trying to write something that will get people thinking. I certainly don't think that everyone listening to this will agree with everything that we write. In fact, I hope that they don't. But we're trying to put some ideas out there that are thought-provoking and put them out in a way that people can really access them, understand them, and where it becomes more, to your point about an organic conversation, like the book was intended to be a bit of an organic discovery for the reader.
So let's get into the book, the heartbeat of it, the new American economy. I am a very traditional entrepreneur, 35 years in, started things with zero. I read the new American economy. I was reading, parts of the book, obviously, to prep for this. Is it real? Is this wishful thinking? I mean, I love where you're going, Anne, from north of the border. What can I tell you? But is this real, Elizabeth?
You have a kind of cynical view of the United States at this point.
No, I've got a partner there. I've been doing business there and into Europe and whatever for my whole career. But at this moment in time, I was going, wow, this is courageous.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I mean, I tend to think courage is the most important quality of all that you can have in life. So thank you for saying that. It is real. I mean, that this is the thing, right? Like, I've been a journalist now for decades. And one of the things we didn't write about in the book, but that underpins what's going on now, is that our information systems are really broken. And because of that, I don't think people are aware of the trends that we're writing about in the book, which in fact are every system, every new evolution of capitalism has its good points and bad points. But there definitely is a concerted effort right now to reinvent the American economy in a way that works better for everyone based on what we know about how economics and equality work. And that is not like, it's not a crazy pipe dream. It's not unreal. It's just some news that has not gotten to most people. And so that's one of the reasons that we wrote the book, to shed light on the fact that there is an evolution going on among consumers, among entrepreneurs, among CEOs and investors. It is happening. It is broad, and it's across the economy.
Seth, do you want to follow on from that? Because, I mean, one of the things it talks about, like, maybe talk about some of the trends, but, one of the things it talks about is empowering the middle class. And I'm like, what middle class?
Yeah. Well, fortunately, it still exists. It's shrinking. It depends a little bit on how you measure it, but it's definitely shrinking. I would say, I might add something to what Elizabeth just said.
Absolutely.
To start with, which is, it is both real and wishful thinking, right? Like it is both aspirational, perhaps a better way of saying it, but also it is an observation of what is going on. And so, I mean, what we really describe in the book is sort of 50 years of history, particularly around the U.S. economy, right, where we are been organized under this capitalist principle of neoliberalism, right? Or you could call it the Washington Consensus. You could call it Friedman-style economics after Milton Friedman, but really since sort of the mid-ish 70s, that's the style of economy that we've been running, and in particular, sort of started in 1970 when Friedman wrote his relatively well-known now New York Times essay stating that the only responsibility of a business is to their shareholders. That was based on a book he had written a few years before. But really accelerated in the 80s. Reagan and Thatcher were big. Ronald Reagan in the U.S., Margaret Thatcher in the U.K., big proponents of this style of capitalism, and we saw that sort of run rampant through the 80s and then the 90s, right? I mean, it was not sort of associated with one political party or another, but was really sort of became mainstream. And, you know, there are, and so it's always seemed like that for most people that are sort of in our age cohort or younger, because we've only ever lived under neoliberal style capitalism. And it has actually not done a very good job ultimately of sharing the gains of the economy widely, right? I mean, and we run the risk here. The overall, in particular, U.S. economy has done quite well over the last 50 years. Not as well, by the way, as it did in the 30 years before that, but still quite well and quite well relative to most other economies in the world. But we run the risk of the sort of the old Jeff Bezos joke where Jeff Bezos walks into a bar and the average person in the bar is a billionaire, but it doesn't actually tell you anything about anyone in the bar, right? And so we've had that challenge. And one of the things that neoliberal style capitalism requires us to do, is that it requires us to think about the inputs to production as things to be minimized, right? And in the case of the middle class, essentially all of whom make the majority of their living through their own labor became another thing to be minimized, right? And so it was outsourced, and wages were held down, et cetera. And that's why middle class incomes have gone up 12% in the last 30 years, total 12% in the last 30 years. In contrast with executive pay and CEO pay that's gone up by, 900% over that same time period. And so in the book, we describe it this way, like we treat the middle class, or we have treated the middle class as a resource to be extracted from. And, kind of like we've treated the environment as well. We talk about some prescriptions on that. I won't go into that in this answer because I'm sure you're going to ask about that. But that's the framing that we offer in the book. And we talk about that. Again, it's not a value judgments thing, right? Like neoliberalism is not how I would personally have, and I think Elizabeth would have personally organized our economy, but it obviously created a lot of wealth, but it didn't do a good job. Sort of Reagan famously described trickle-down economics. Trickle-down didn't work, right? We did not actually share prosperity in the way that we wanted to. Now, are the overall standards of living higher, right? For the dollar that you spend on your automobile, whatever, like, are you getting more? Yeah. I mean, and that was kind of what we did, is that we said, hey, middle class, you can now get a, $400 flat screen TV. Aren't you happy? And yeah, there was some benefit in cheaper goods, things like that. But overall, we were not actually allowing them to share in the prosperity of our economy. And I think what we outline in the book are some ways that we could do a better job of that going forward. And much more importantly, the reasons why that's important, right? We've created incredible instability. We see it in our politics as a great example, but it exists sort of all over our economy. We can't keep growing in the way that we are as an economy without doing a better job of empowering the middle class. So what we would argue to people who are the haves in our economy is, if you want to keep having, we're going to need to reorganize a little bit. And that's I think that's important. But at the same time, we wanted to defend capitalism. I mean, we sort of got lucky in the timing because everyone's asking these questions now that we've got socialists, about to be running the biggest city in the U.S. And so we wanted to also offer up a defense of capitalism. Like, we can get there under capitalism, and it's way better than collectivism, socialism, communism, et cetera. But we should recognize that the system should change a bit.
And Seth, you call us a social democracy. What can I tell you? I'm sorry, I'm straight up capitalist. Okay, thank you for that. Sorry. Look, I can take.
We are too. Look, I'm a capitalist by job title too, so I'm really stuck.
Elizabeth, so there's one thing, the middle class, but I mean, and this is where we can get to some of the solutions, but also hope for the next gen. I mean, when I came up in a family of entrepreneurs. I came up in an environment of entrepreneurs. So I actually felt like I had a path to starting something, to doing something differently. And when I look at the balance of profit and purpose and the empowerment that you're talking about, I'm not sure that teenagers necessarily 16, 18, and then going into the university system have that level of hope or access. So what next?
Yeah, well, I think that's why we wrote the book, right? Recognizing that what has been a hallmark of the U.S. economy, more than that, a part of the U.S. identity, right? The idea that you could start with nothing and build your way up, which was always part illusion, part aspiration, and part truth, right? It's always been that combination of things, but that's weakening, right? That ability, if you're born in the bottom 25% of the economy now, you've got very little chance, 5%, of rising into the top 25%, in contrast to what's been true in other generations. So we recognize that. We write about that pretty extensively in the book. And one of the ways that the politics has played into hardening our divides is that we've gotten caught up in this debate about how to fix it, right? And some people have said, well, we should focus on race. And race became very dominant in the past, decade. Diversity, right? Became a very political issue. We stopped looking at class, which has always been perhaps the bigger factor. And we just got frozen, right? The environment, the information environment, and the political system got frozen so that we haven't been able to address it. So we don't have exact prescriptions for how to restore the middle class. We have 2 or 3 ideas that we found the most evidence for and that make the most sense to us. One of those is building more of an ownership economy, which is that we need more company owners to as they're selling their businesses, sell them to employees. So that's one good way to build the capital that people may need to start their companies, as well as the hope, right? If you feel invested in something, if you know what that feels like and what it means to be a responsible owner, I think that's one way we can re-empower the middle class. Greater ownership in the equities market is another strong path that we see to rebuilding the middle class. The education system is not something we wrote about in the book, but it's one of my personal kind of missions in life, that's a really important aspect of it right now. And then, just other sort of common sense things that Seth and I have both been writing about for a long time, which mean making it easier to start businesses, reforming the capital system so that you can borrow money more readily, right? All those things are still prescriptions that we recommend as well.
And Seth, do you want to build on that a bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's really important for listeners to recognize is that what we describe is not intended to be altruistic, right? We are not describing, I think sometimes, especially in today's politics, we see everything as zero sum, right? And so there's lots of discussions about how do we split the pie up? And those are important, those are relevant. But I think what we care about more is how do we grow the bigger pie? Right? Because if we grow a bigger pie, then everyone is doing better. And I think one of the challenges, again, with current politics is that that's not the lens through which we look at things. And so when Elizabeth says, empowering an ownership economy, well, I mean, there's some practical things that are happening that are different than they were let's say 50 or 70 years ago, right? I mean, the biggest companies of 50 or 70 years ago, if you take a look at that, their top line and the percentage of their top line, their percentage of their revenue that was paid out in the form of wages, right, to labor. It was significantly higher than it is today because they're different businesses. Kodak had a very different business. Sears had a very these are the big companies back in the day. Those are different businesses than Meta or Alphabet or Nvidia. And in no way are we arguing that the current businesses should somehow hire a bunch of people and be less efficient. That's not true at all. But we should recognize that it used to be that you could actually share in the fruits of the work through your labor in a way that was significant and meaningful. And that has become harder and harder. And we've historically tried to separate out capital and labor. And what we're really arguing for is more of an overlap. How do we, I like to say it using this language, how do we create more capitalists, right? And I think what you see when you see the rise of populism, whether it's on the left or the right, but especially if you talk to, sort of what motivated Mamdani voters to vote for a socialist in New York, if you have no stake in the financial system, you feel like you're never going to get on top of your debt or whatever it is, then you don't care about the markets, right? You don't actually, you look for something else. And it sounds great. I'm going to get some free stuff and my rent's not going to go up. And that's the allure of socialism. And it has this pull and a pull that is especially strong when people feel dissociated from the market economy and opportunity, right? And so what we describe when we describe things like create an ownership economy is bringing more people into the ownership side of the ledger so we create more capitalists, so there are more people that have a stake in the economy and in their business specifically. And one of the stories we tell in the book is of Pete Stavros, who is a managing director at KKR, right? A very capitalist firm, right? Barbarians at the Gate was written about them back in the 80s. Their takeover of RJR Nabisco. So, and they're in business to make money. They're a public company too. So any of us could own a piece of it. But Pete, who runs the North American manufacturing business for them, he has been experimenting with employee ownership in businesses where that's not common, right? And certainly in the tech world, having stock options and having everyone participate is relatively common, almost ubiquitous. Yeah. That's not true in most other businesses. And Pete started experimenting that in meaningful ways in some of their manufacturing businesses, not because he had some altruistic, like, hey, I want to share the wealth idea, because he thought that we will create better outcomes for our shareholders, the KKR shareholders, and for these individual people that work at these businesses. And he's been right? Which is why KKR is now rolling that out to more and more companies that they invest in, because it turns out when more people have a stake in their business, they think about it differently. And I won't tell the whole story of Pete, but he comes by it very naturally. He grew up in a very working class family. He saw what happened with both of his parents, who were paid hourly, and sort of the mentality that drives, and this sort of wedge between, in that case, management, if you will, and people and workers. And he thought there's a better way to do this where people feel like they're empowered. And part of that is not just sharing the ownership, but then it's like empowering people who maybe on a shop line, if you're in a manufacturing business, just to raise their hand and say, wait a minute, this is not the way to do this thing. Why don't we think about it in a different way? And they get rewarded for that, because ultimately, and there's a bunch of stories, we tell a couple of them in the book, of, these companies sell, and these, people that, are, again, like workers on the production line, making hundreds of thousands, if not more, dollars in these exits, right? And that may be common in the tech world, but it's not common in some of these other places. And it should be more common. That's what we argue for.
Okay, but let's take it. You're talking about one specific class, one opportunity to get funds to more people. When you talk about entrepreneurship and you bring it down to the basics, Elizabeth, as we move to this plutocratic kind of, this huge divide, it's always been, you start with friends and family. But if friends and family can't help you with the 1,000, 5, 10, 20,000, whatever that dollar is, where do you go to? Because again, and I might be showing my age as an entrepreneur, but what I was always told is, don't take money until you absolutely, absolutely need to. So Are we starving the bottom of the food chain in entrepreneurship? This is what I'm not understanding.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I don't want to steal sort of everything from the book. We actually talk about a lot of ideas, right? So this idea that of sharing ownership is one of many that we discuss from the framework that we outline around why empowering more people across more of the classes in the U.S. makes a lot of sense, right? And why doing that from a capitalist framework is important. So certainly in our last book, which was The New Builders, of all about the entrepreneurial economy, we made a lot of arguments for how and why we should connect different forms of capital up to an opportunity up to entrepreneurs, the people that are building in the U.S. 31 million small businesses that exist here and power roughly 50% of our economy, right? And small businesses is responsible for, roughly speaking, 50% of employment and just under 50% of GDP. Like, this is important. And so absolutely, like the adage of like, take money as late as you can makes sense for people that have some resources themselves or invest in things. But obviously it doesn't work if you need help getting going, right? Now, one of the things that we found in research in The New Builders is that it actually doesn't necessarily take a lot of money, right? We tend to, in the entrepreneurial world, or certainly in the tech entrepreneurial world, we think of like a seed round as a few $1 million, right? But like that's a huge amount of money. If you're starting sort of a small business, it doesn't need to be that big. And we saw this in the pandemic. The U.S. handed out $1,500 checks or stimulus checks. And there was a huge uptick in people starting businesses. Now, I mean, is $1,500 enough? No. I mean, there needs to be more than that, but it's a good example of like people are very scrappy, and when they have opportunity, and in this case, opportunity was I got $1,500 I wasn't expecting, they find ways to invest it, right? It did not. I think there was this fear that people would, I don't know, spend it binge watching Netflix or something like that. But that's actually not for a large part what actually happened. People were like, hey, I want to start a business. So how do we create an economy that provides more overall opportunity? And that's ultimately what we're trying to argue for in The New Builders, in Capital Evolution. And we have a bunch of different things that we talk about for how to do that.
And I wanted to say something that is a little, I don't know, it's a little pushy, right? Like, one of the things we write about in the book is the need for people at the elite end of the economy. That's really who our book is written toward, right? Our readers are business leaders. We interviewed a bunch of the world's biggest CEOs for the book. And what they need to recognize, because we all need to recognize that we need a new system, right? Capitalism needs a reset because it is no longer working for the majority of people in America. And that's what you want from a society, that it works for the majority of people, that people get a shot, that you can build. And it's not going to happen through the government. And that's one of the issues. That's one of the big problems in the conversation, is that people talk about this as if the government is the solution. And meanwhile, government is so much weaker than it has been in decades for many reasons. And that's a decades-long trend. So if these changes are going to happen, they're going to have to come from business leaders. They're going to have to be deliberate. We saw some evidence that business leaders are stepping forward, but it's not enough. And that probably means, to your pragmatic question, right? It's going to have to be business leaders coming together and establishing new rules or institutions. Maybe they're at the state level. Maybe they are at the federal level. Maybe it's restoring some of the things that have been taken apart in the past year. Maybe it's not, right? These are all big questions, but it does need to be leadership from the business community that establishes better financial institutions that get money to people who want to start businesses.
So I've been talking with Seth Levine and Elizabeth MacBride, co-authors of Capital Evolution, the New American Economy. It's amazing how quickly 30 minutes go. So let me leave this with one thought. And you highlight cities and communities that rarely make national economic headlines. I think this is so critical. I heard, I'm about to go blank, the founder of AOL, who also is fishing in this pond, writing about the
Steve Case.
Yes.
Thank you. Who I've known for the last 40 years of my life, his name, until right now. Tell me more about why this is important to you, sort of your leaving thoughts or your parting thoughts.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, I founded a publication to look at entrepreneurship across the middle of America. I still write about it. When we begin the book, actually, in our introduction by talking about the fact that we were out of touch. If you live in these bubbles on the East Coast, which did do well under the neoliberal system, which did do well in this booming, in the tech boom of the past couple of decades, you may not realize how much struggle there is in secondary markets, small towns and cities. I do a lot of work in developing markets. There are places I went in the U.S. that I thought, this is a developing market. We have sunk to the level in much of America that it feels like worlds that places people think of as far away are actually right here at home. And so I actually think that that's where the future is going to arise this time around. And so it's really important to recognize how important those places are, because that's where a lot of the power will come from as we're building a new future.
Perfect. Seth, final thought?
I would say I'm wildly optimistic about the U.S. and the global economy, right? And I am an unabashed capitalist. I'm an unabashed patriot as I think about the U.S. specifically. I'm born and raised here, so I'm an American, and I care deeply about the success of our entire economy and this entire, we call it the American experiment, right? That's sometimes how we refer to it here, and I so deeply believe in it. And my motivation for writing this book was to offer a roadmap that I thought would help better perpetuate that American experiment. And I think that, I think we've done that. I think it's thought provoking. I think, as I mentioned, I don't think people will agree with everything that we put in the book, but I hope that we've given people a little bit of a sort of a flavor for the types of things we talk about. And if you're interested in that, I know people don't read books a lot anymore, but we're here sort of pitching it, right? We don't get rich off of writing books. We really just are contributing our ideas into the ether. But I hope that a lot of people read it, right? I mean, Elizabeth and I know our main motivation is to get these ideas out there and get people to read it and then hear some feedback on it. So I hope that people's interest will be piqued and they'll go to thecapitalevolution.com and figure out how to pick one up.
Or the local both. Oh, but both for joining me. Oh, let me try.
Thanks, Ken.
Thank you both. If you enjoyed this episode and you want to support our show, leave us a review and join our mailing list by visiting www.spyder.works. That's SPYDER.works, and subscribe to our channel. Leave us a comment with who we should interview next. Thank you for listening, and see you all next Friday.